Jason and Marcus grew up in the same small town where life was simple but full of dreams. Their friendship began when they were just kids, running barefoot through the streets, playing with sticks instead of expensive toys, and sharing whatever little they had. Jason was a white boy from a middle-class family. His parents worked hard, but never had to worry about food on the table. Marcus, on the other hand, was a black kid from a struggling home. His mother worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, and his father was never around. But none of that mattered to them. They were just 2 boys who loved adventure. From the moment they met in elementary school, they became inseparable. Marcus had a way of making Jason laugh until his stomach hurt. Jason, in return, always found a way to lift Marcus's spirits when things got tough at home. They would spend hours playing basketball at the local park, dreaming about their futures. Jason wanted to be a big-time actor, standing on a stage with bright lights shining down on him. Marcus wanted to be a musician, playing the piano in front of thousands of cheering fans. They made a promise. No matter what happened in life, they would always support each other. Every summer, they would sneak into the old movie theater in town, watching classic films and imagining themselves as the heroes on screen. Jason would act out scenes, mimicking the actors, while Marcus would tap out melodies on the seat next to him, turning every moment into music. They believed that one day they would make it big together. "When you become a famous actor, don't forget about me," Marcus would joke. Jason always replied, "Never. We're in this together." But as the years passed, life started pulling them in different directions. Jason's parents encouraged him to follow his dreams. They supported his acting lessons and even helped him move to Los Angeles when he got accepted into a small acting program. Marcus, however, didn't have the same opportunities. His mother lost one of her jobs, and he had to start working after school to help pay bills. He still played music whenever he could, but his dreams seemed further away than ever. The day Jason left for Los Angeles was bittersweet. Marcus was proud of his best friend, but couldn't help feeling left behind. Jason promised to call and visit as much as possible. At first, he did. They talked on the phone every week, sharing stories about their lives. But as Jason got busier with auditions, the calls became less frequent. Eventually, life took over, and they lost touch. Jason didn't mean to forget about Marcus. He just assumed that his friend was doing fine. He had no idea that the boy who once played music in the park with him was now struggling to survive. Years later, when Jason learned the truth, the memory of their childhood promise would come rushing back, changing both of their lives forever. Life in Los Angeles was not easy for Jason at first. He struggled to get acting roles, attending one audition after another with no success. He lived in a tiny apartment, worked as a waiter to pay his bills, and sometimes doubted if he had made the right decision. But he never gave up. He kept pushing, taking small roles in commercials and background scenes, hoping for his big break. During this time, he still thought about Marcus. He meant to call, but each day was so busy that he kept putting it off. "I'll call him tomorrow," he would tell himself. But tomorrow turned into weeks, then months, then years. Marcus, meanwhile, had his own battles. After Jason left, things got worse at home. His mother struggled to pay rent, and Marcus had to drop out of college to work full-time. He took whatever jobs he could find, working at a gas station, stocking shelves at a grocery store, even cleaning offices at night. He still played music whenever he had time, but his dreams of becoming a musician felt like a distant memory. There were moments when he wanted to call Jason, to tell him how hard things had become. But every time he thought about it, he stopped himself. He didn't want to sound like he was asking for help. He told himself that Jason was busy, chasing his dream, and he didn't want to be a burden. So he stayed silent, even as his struggles grew. Years passed. Jason finally got his big break when he landed a supporting role in a popular TV show. The show became a hit, and soon more opportunities came his way. He moved into a luxury apartment, drove a fancy car, and attended glamorous events. The boy who once dreamed of being an actor had finally made it. Marcus, on the other hand, was facing his darkest days. His mother passed away, leaving him completely alone. Without her income, he couldn't afford the apartment they had lived in for years. He tried everything to keep going, but one bad turn after another left him homeless. He slept in shelters when he could, sometimes on park benches, carrying nothing but a small bag with a few clothes and an old notebook filled with his song lyrics. One evening, Jason sat in his living room, scrolling through social media when a video caught his eye. It showed a homeless man playing the piano in a subway station. The man's fingers moved across the keys with such emotion that people stopped to listen, some even leaving money in his cup. Jason watched closely, something about the man looking familiar. Then, as the camera zoomed in, his heart stopped. It was Marcus. Jason couldn't believe it. The same friend who once dreamed of playing music for crowds was now playing in a subway for spare change. Guilt washed over him. How had he let so much time pass without checking in? He knew one thing for sure. He had to find Marcus. And this time, he wouldn't let him down. Jason couldn't stop thinking about the video. He watched it over and over, staring at Marcus's face. He looked different. His clothes were worn, his hair unkempt, and there was a tired look in his eyes. But there was no doubt. It was him. His childhood best friend, the boy who once dreamed of being a great musician, was now homeless, playing for spare change in a subway station. Jason felt a deep sadness, mixed with guilt. How had this happened? How had he let so many years pass without checking on Marcus? He had assumed that his friend was doing fine, just living his own life. But now he realized how wrong he had been. Without wasting another minute, Jason grabbed his phone and started searching. He looked at the comments on the video, trying to find any clues about where Marcus might be. Some people mentioned the subway station where he was playing. Others talked about seeing him at different places around the city. Jason's heart pounded. He had to find him. The next morning, Jason canceled his plans and went straight to the subway station. He walked up and down, searching for Marcus, hoping he would still be there. But the station was busy, filled with people rushing to work. There was no sign of his friend. Disappointed but not ready to give up, Jason kept looking. He visited other subway stations, checked local shelters, and even asked people on the streets if they had seen Marcus. Hours passed, but he found nothing. That night, Jason sat in his car, frustrated. He had all the money, all the connections, but at that moment, he felt powerless. What was the point of all his success if he couldn't even help his best friend? Then, an idea came to him. He posted the video on his own social media, asking if anyone had seen Marcus recently. With millions of followers, he hoped someone would recognize him. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from people who had seen Marcus around different parts of the city. Some said he played music near an old bookstore. Others said they had seen him in a park. One message stood out. It was from a woman who worked at a homeless shelter. "I think I know him," she wrote. "He sometimes stays here, but he doesn't come every night." Jason's heart raced as he quickly replied, asking for the shelter's address. Without hesitation, he drove there, determined to find Marcus. When he arrived, he felt nervous. What if Marcus didn't want to see him? What if he was angry that Jason had disappeared from his life? Taking a deep breath, Jason stepped inside. The shelter was quiet, filled with people resting on cots. He scanned the room, his eyes searching desperately. Then, in the corner, he saw him. Marcus was sitting alone, staring down at his hands. He looked thinner, older, but it was him. Jason felt a lump in his throat as he took a step forward. "Marcus," he said softly. Marcus looked up, his tired eyes widening in shock. For a moment, he just stared. Then, recognition hit. "Jason," he whispered. Neither of them moved. After all these years, they were finally face to face again. For a moment, neither Jason nor Marcus spoke. They just stared at each other, both in shock. It had been years since they last met, but now They were standing face to face in a homeless shelter. Jason could hardly believe it. This was his best friend. The same Marcus who once made him laugh until his stomach hurt. The same Marcus who played music on park benches while they dreamed about their futures. Marcus, on the other hand, looked unsure. His eyes flickered with surprise, but also with something else. Hesitation. He had spent so long feeling invisible, forgotten by the world. And now, here was Jason, standing in front of him, looking like he had just walked out of a Hollywood movie. Expensive clothes, a clean haircut, and the confidence of someone whose life had turned out well. Marcus swallowed hard. What are you doing here?" Marcus finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jason stepped forward, his emotions getting the best of him. "I saw you, Marcus. I saw the video. I had no idea. I didn't know things were like this for you." His voice cracked slightly, and he shook his head. "I should have called. I should have checked on you." Marcus let out a small chuckle, but there was no humor in it. Life happens, man. People forget. He looked away, his fingers gripping the edge of the blanket draped over his shoulders. "I'm used to it." Jason's heart ached at those words. Marcus wasn't the same carefree boy he used to know. Life had been tough on him, and it showed in his tired eyes and the way he sat, as if he was carrying the weight of the world. "I never forgot you," Jason said firmly. "I swear, I didn't. I thought you were okay. I didn't know you were going through all this." He took a deep breath and looked around the shelter. The room was filled with people just like Marcus. People who had fallen on hard times, people who had once had dreams but had been beaten down by life. Jason clenched his fists. He couldn't just walk away. "Come with me," Jason finally said. "Let me help you." Marcus shook his head. "I don't need your pity, Jason." "It's not pity," Jason said quickly. "It's friendship. It's me making up for the years I wasn't there. Let me do this, Marcus. Please." Marcus stared at him for a long time. Then, after what felt like forever, he sighed. "All right," he said softly. "But just for tonight." Jason nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. It was a start. He wasn't going to let Marcus slip away again. Not this time. As they walked out of the shelter together, Jason knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. He was going to change Marcus's life, no matter what it took. Jason and Marcus walked out of the shelter together, stepping into the cold night air. Jason noticed how Marcus pulled his thin jacket tightly around himself, trying to stay warm. It broke Jason's heart to think about how long his friend had been living like this. He had spent years in luxury, never worrying about food or shelter, while Marcus had been struggling to survive. The guilt weighed heavily on him. They got into Jason's car, a sleek, expensive vehicle that felt completely out of place after leaving the shelter. Marcus sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Jason wanted to say something, but he didn't know where to start. He could tell that Marcus was uncomfortable. "Are you hungry?" Jason finally asked. Marcus hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, I could eat." Jason smiled. "Good. I know a great place." They drove to a small diner, the kind they used to visit when they were kids. Jason remembered how they would sit for hours, talking about their dreams over burgers and fries. When they walked inside, the warm air and smell of fresh food filled the space. Marcus looked around, as if he hadn't been inside a restaurant in a long time. They found a booth in the corner and sat down. When the waitress arrived, Marcus ordered a simple meal, while Jason ordered extra food, just in case Marcus wanted more. As they waited, there was a long silence between them. Finally, Jason spoke. "Marcus, I need to know, how did things get this bad?" Marcus sighed and leaned back in his seat. "It wasn't just one thing," he admitted. "After my mom passed away, everything fell apart. I lost our apartment, lost my job. I tried to get back on my feet, but every time I thought things were getting better, something else went wrong. I slept in my car for a while, until I couldn't afford to keep it anymore. Then I ended up on the streets." Jason swallowed hard. He had been so focused on his own life that he never even thought about what Marcus might have been going through. He felt ashamed. "Why didn't you reach out to me?" Jason asked. "You know I would have helped." Marcus looked down at his hands. "At first, I didn't want to bother you. You were busy, living your dream. And then, as time passed, I just felt like it was too late. I didn't want you to see me like this." Jason shook his head. "Marcus, it's never too late. You're my best friend. You always have been." He leaned forward, his voice firm. "And I'm not letting you go through this alone anymore." Marcus looked up at Jason, and for the first time that night, his eyes held something different. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Jason knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Marcus return to the streets. This was just the beginning of his plan to help his friend get his life back. After finishing their meal, Jason and Marcus walked back to the car. The night was quiet, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a little lighter. The warm food in his stomach and the familiar company of his old friend made him feel like life wasn't completely hopeless. Jason drove through the city, deep in thought. He had made up his mind. He wasn't going to let Marcus go back to the streets, but he also knew he had to be careful. Marcus had his pride, and Jason didn't want him to feel like a charity case. "I have a guest room at my place," Jason said casually. "You can stay there for as long as you need. No pressure." Marcus looked out the window, silent for a moment. "I don't know, man. I've been on my own for so long. It feels weird accepting help." Jason glanced at him. "Come on, Marcus. If the roles were reversed, wouldn't you do the same for me?" Marcus sighed, then gave a small nod. "Yeah, I would." "Then stop acting like this is some favor," Jason said with a grin. "We're friends. Friends help each other." Marcus didn't argue after that. He was too tired, both physically and emotionally, to fight the idea anymore. A warm bed sounded better than another night in the cold. When they reached Jason's house, Marcus couldn't hide his amazement. The place was huge, modern, elegant, and nothing like the tiny apartments they used to dream about when they were kids. "Wow," Marcus muttered, stepping inside. "You really made it." Jason smiled but didn't respond. He led Marcus to the guest room, where a large, comfortable bed waited. Fresh towels, clean clothes, and even a pair of slippers were neatly placed on a chair. Marcus ran his hand over the soft blanket, feeling overwhelmed. It had been years since he had slept in a real bed. "This is too much, man." Jason crossed his arms. "It's just a bed, Marcus. Get some rest." Marcus didn't argue this time. He was exhausted. As soon as he lay down, his body relaxed into the mattress, and for the first time in years, he felt safe. Before he knew it, he was fast asleep. Jason stood by the door for a moment, watching his friend. He had seen Marcus at his lowest, and now he was going to make sure his life turned around. The next morning, when Marcus woke up, he smelled food. He followed the scent to the kitchen, where Jason was making breakfast. The table was already set, with eggs, toast, and fresh juice waiting. "Morning," Jason said, flipping a pancake. "Hope you're hungry." Marcus chuckled. "Man, I could eat everything on this table." Jason laughed. "Good, because today we're making a plan. It's time to get your life back." For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. As Marcus sat at the table, enjoying the warm breakfast, he still felt like he was dreaming. Just yesterday, he was sleeping in a shelter, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. Now he was in a beautiful house, eating food cooked by his best friend. Jason sat across from him, watching him closely. "All right," Jason said, setting down his fork. "We need a plan. You can't go back to the streets. I want to help you get back on your feet." Marcus hesitated. chewing slowly. He wanted to believe things could change, but part of him was scared. I appreciate this, Jason, I really do. But what if I fail again? Jason leaned forward. Then we try again. And again. Until you make it. His voice was firm, full of determination. You were always the strongest person I knew, Marcus. You didn't give up back then. And I won't let you give up now. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right. Where do we start? Jason smiled. First, we clean you up. Then we figure out a job and a place for you to stay long-term. That afternoon, Jason took Marcus shopping for new clothes. At first, Marcus felt uncomfortable walking into fancy stores, but Jason made him laugh, making jokes about fashion and how he had to look like a new man. Slowly, Marcus started to feel less out of place. After getting clothes, Jason took him to a barber shop. As the barber trimmed his hair and shaved his beard, Marcus looked at himself in the mirror. He barely recognized the person staring back. He looked normal, like himself again. When they left, Jason grinned. Now that's the Marcus I remember. Marcus chuckled. I do look a little less like a caveman, huh? The next step was finding work. Jason knew Marcus still had his musical talent, so he set up a small audition at a local jazz club he often visited. The owner, an old friend of Jason's, agreed to give Marcus a chance. That evening, Marcus sat at the piano, nervous. His hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the keys. He hadn't played in front of an audience in years. Jason gave him a reassuring nod from the crowd. Taking a deep breath, Marcus began to play. At first, it was slow and soft, but as the music flowed, his confidence grew. The notes filled the room, touching every soul inside. The crowd listened, mesmerized. When he finished, there was a moment of silence, then loud applause. The club owner clapped and walked over. That, he said, was incredible. You've got a gift, kid. How'd you like a regular spot here? Marcus couldn't believe it. You serious? Dead serious, the owner replied. Marcus looked at Jason, who was smiling proudly. Maybe, just maybe, his life was turning around. Marcus could hardly believe it. A regular spot at a jazz club. Just a few days ago, he had been playing for spare change in a subway station. Now, people were actually cheering for him. The feeling was overwhelming. As he stepped off the stage, Jason was the first to greet him. I told you, Jason said with a grin, clapping him on the back. You've still got it. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. Man, I don't even know what to say. The club owner handed Marcus an envelope. Your first payment, he said. Welcome to the team. Marcus stared at the envelope in his hands. It wasn't much, but it was the first real money he had earned in years. A mix of emotions hit him. Relief, happiness, and hope. Over the next few weeks, Marcus played at the club regularly. People started recognizing him, and some even came back just to hear him play. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. But Jason wasn't done helping. We need to find you a place, he said one evening after Marcus's performance. Marcus hesitated. Jason, you've already done so much. I can't ask for more. You're not asking. I'm offering, Jason said firmly. I've been looking at apartments. I found one close to the club, small but nice. I'll cover the first few months' rent until you're steady on your feet. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. Why are you doing all this for me? Jason's smile softened. Because you're my best friend. And because if the roles were reversed, I know you'd do the same for me. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. He had spent so many years feeling forgotten, but Jason had proved that real friendship never fades. A week later, Marcus moved into his new apartment. It wasn't big, but it was his. He stood in the middle of the room, looking around, unable to believe how much had changed. Jason tossed him a small gift box. Open it. Inside was a brand new keyboard. Marcus ran his fingers over the keys, his eyes filled with gratitude. You're something else, man, he said, shaking his head. Jason grinned. I know. As months passed, Marcus's life continued to improve. His performances at the club attracted attention, and soon he was playing at bigger venues. He started saving money, and for the first time in years, he felt secure. One evening, as he played on stage, he looked into the crowd and spotted Jason watching proudly. Marcus smiled, knowing none of this would have been possible without him. After the show, he found Jason and hugged him tightly. "You saved my life," Marcus said. Jason shook his head. "Nah, man, you saved your own. I just reminded you what you were capable of." And with that, their friendship became stronger than ever.